So the law of cosines goes like this. It depends on what letter you start with. But here's what I'm thinking. If we want to show that a triangle is a right triangle, okay, and it does say you got to use the law of cosines. I know some of you might be going, I could do that with Pythagorean theorem. I know you can, all right. Usually we call the side across from the right angle what letter? Yes, it is the hypotenuse. What letter do we call it, A, B, or C? Usually C, okay? Again, it doesn't really matter, but just thinking with that. So we'd have C squared equals A squared plus B squared. Again, that's the Pythagorean theorem, but then to make it work for any triangle, minus 2, help me continue, times A times B times cosine of C, okay? Now, some people get mixed up, and it seems silly when I say it, but some people put sine here, but it's called law of cosine, so make sure there's a cosine there, okay? Now, again, if I have these three sides, if I didn't know it was a right triangle, the longest side would have to be across from the right angle, right? Our hypotenuse is always the longest side. So when I think of what am I going to call A, B, and C, it doesn't matter except for that the longest side would be the hypotenuse if this was true. So I'm going to start this thing with 10 squared. And so it would look like this. 10 squared equals 8 squared plus 6 squared minus 2 times 8 times 6 times the cosine of. Now, you can do this two ways, but I think one of the ways is way easier than the other, okay? And the way I think is easier is to assume that this is a 90-degree angle and put 90 in here. And then all we have to show is that both sides equal each other, okay? If I left a variable there, then you remember how awful that was to solve for that variable when it's way back here? I think that's way harder. You can do it that way, but I would assume it's a 90-degree angle. And then if we get that both sides are equal, we're good. Okay, so a couple things to remember. You want to start with the longest side. All right. And then again, I would put 90 degrees in there. And as long as I can show that both sides are equal, then I know it's a right triangle. And I know this side's 100 because I know what 10 squared is. Make sure that you're in degree mode and type that in. And hopefully we get 100. Let's see if that happens. So I got 100, okay? Again, there is another way. I just think it's harder. You know, you could call this a variable and then add these and subtract. You know, it's just a pain to do it that way. So if you assume that it is, you know, the way this question could change is just that there would be the word not in here, okay? Show that these sides do not make a right triangle. And then what would happen differently in this problem? They wouldn't equal each other. You know, we'd get 190 or something like that. So again, the only way this could change is I would give you sides that don't work and put the word not in there. And then we would get two numbers that don't equal. Okay? So this sort of strategy would work either way, whether this says it is a right triangle or it is not. Okay? Now, number 20, I don't know about you, but it's helpful for me to label this stuff on my picture before I decide do I use law of sines or law of cosines. So go ahead and put the appropriate labels on that triangle. And so once we get it labeled, again, some of you guys might have measured or might have remembered, oh, it's angle, angle, side, so I'm going to use, again, my mind doesn't work that way, so I think usually I start with law of sines because to me that's a little easier than law of cosines. So I think, could I set it up that way? Could I do sine of 140 over 5 equals sine of 15 over x? And the answer to that is yes, I could because I'm only having one variable. Again, it's not law of cosines because look what I'd have to do for law of cosines. X squared equals 5 squared plus, oops, I don't know this side either, okay? So what I do is try both of them. One of them I'm going to get stuck and not be able to figure it out, but the other one will work, okay? So again, the setup would look, or could look, something like this. Sine of 140 over 5 equals sine of 15 over x. Okay. What do we do with that now? Yep. So I get x times the sine of 140 equals 5 times the sine of 15. I like to put the numbers out front. They don't have to go in front, but what I find when people put them behind is they end up in these parentheses with the angle, and that's not correct. And then divide by the sine of 140. Go ahead and type that in. Again, speaking of parentheses, make sure you're closing that or it's going to mess up that answer. And I got this answer. 2.01 rounded to the nearest tenth, though. This 1 would leave that as 0. So it would be 2.0 or just 2 if you wanted to write that rounded to the nearest tenth. Okay. A lot of times people will say, well, how come sometimes you do the inverse sine thing and sometimes you don't? Remember that if we're finding an angle, we'll have to do inverse sine at some point or inverse cosine. But if we're just finding a side, we never have to do that step. And then, thank goodness, one of these came back, all right, where we're finding all of those parts. Again, the equation that this is modeled after is this one. Probably good to have on your help sheet, but definitely good to write on your practice test. Y equals b times the sine or cosine of x minus h over a plus k. And this formula does us absolutely no good unless we know what stuff is, okay? So the amplitude, I'm going to put it right here, is the absolute value of b. Just in other words, amplitude can never be negative because it's like a height. It'd be like saying, yeah, I'm negative 6'2", all right? The period of the wave is 2 pi times, again, really the absolute value of a, but I don't know, I can't even remember when we've had a negative a. The vertical shift is k. So notice that that gets plucked out, remember, the same way because that's the up and down shift. The horizontal shift is h. That's opposite. If it's minus in here, it's plus outside of there. Okay. So kind of most of my work comes in making this equation look more like this one because right now it's not looking so much like that one. Okay. One thing that I'm going to do is move this number 6 to the back of this equation. By the way, notice that I'm not moving it to the other side of the equal sign. I'm just moving it on the same side. So it would still stay a plus 6. So I'd have y equals negative 5 sine of something that I want to change here in a minute, plus 6. Okay. Again, I didn't move it over here, so it's not negative. I just moved its location, but it's still on the same side it was before. Now the biggest transformation is trying to make this thing look like that thing, or vice versa, sorry, that thing look like this thing, okay? If you notice here, there is no number in front of x. We can't have a number in front of x, so see that 4 there? We got to factor that out. So 4 times, so whatever number is in front of x, factor it out. X would be there. Again, that's good, that's what we wanted. All right, but then we got to think about what goes here. You know, think about it a couple of ways. You can think about 4 times what will give me 2, or you can think of dividing both of these things by 4. But either way, I hope you come up with a half or 0.5. Again, 4 times a half is 2. If you think of dividing things in here by 4, 2 divided by 4 is also a half. So we're closer, I think, but again, I'm looking at this equation going, they don't multiply, they divide, all right? So we want to change it from multiplying by 4 to dividing by the reciprocal, or to dividing by 1/4. Okay? So in here, I'm going to write x plus a half. Now, some people like to write minus a negative. I don't know, to me that makes it more confusing, not less, but that's just me. And then divide by a fourth. Okay. And then I think I'm in a position where I can pluck all my answers off. Okay, so the amplitude would be, help me out. It is 5. Remember, we dropped the negative because of the absolute value. The period is 2 pi times a fourth, which we could call 2 pi over 4 or pi over 2 would be reduced. I don't care if you reduce it, honestly. The vertical shift, plus k plus 6, so it's 6. The horizontal shift, now again, if I didn't write this minus a negative, I have to look and go, well, if when there's a minus, it's positive h, then when there's a plus, it would be negative h or negative 1/2. I just try to remember that comes out as opposite. This one comes out as the same. All right, there is a practice B and a pickup station near you. Will you please pick that up?